A study performed by the NFPA on prison fires in the U.S. from 2003 to 2007 revealed that each year an average of $2 million in direct property damage was incurred over an average of 590 structure fires in prisons and jails annually. Also, 37 civilians were injured either by fire or by prisoners during these incidents. None were fatal. However, in the U.S., prison fires have fallen by 88% in the last 30 years. Historically, the area of origin of prison and jail fires has been the cell, but in the period of this NFPA study for 2003 to 2007, kitchens and cooking areas led this category. Fires not confined to cooking equipment or trash were most often started with mattresses and bedding as the fuel source.
There have been numerous prison fires throughout U.S. history, many of which have resulted in significant loss of property and lives. One of the most infamous U.S. prison fires occurred in the Ohio State Penitentiary in 1930 and increased awareness of the need for construction methods and fire suppression systems that would protect the lives of inmates and prison property. Built in 1890 and originally designed to hold 1,500 prisoners, the Ohio State Penitentiary in Columbus was one of the roughest and most crowded prisons in the history of state institutions. It was the end of the line for murderers and other hardened convicts who had spent their entire lives in one sort of prison or another. It was also a well-known fire trap. Warden Preston E. Thomas consistently refused to institute safety devices, drills, or regulations to prevent and combat fires. In 1930, this prison, which was housing 4,300 prisoners in small, cramped cells, gained worldwide notoriety when it became the site of perhaps the worst catastrophe to visit a penal institution in the United States. The overcrowded prison had been undergoing an expansion, and wooden scaffolding was in place by a 6-story tier of cells. On the afternoon of April 21, 1930, an oily rag on the northeast corner of the prison roof caught fire. The blaze spread to the scaffolding, and within moments the prison was transformed into a great blazing oven, with flames raging through 4 cell blocks. More than 300 men were ultimately killed in less than 1 hour. While the resultant property damage was comparatively small, estimated by Warden Thomas as being about $11,000, the various circumstances surrounding this fire and the appalling loss of life call attention to the potential hazards of fire in a prison. Several combustible construction materials allowed for the fire to spread rapidly. The section of the building where the fire occurred was constructed of brick. The ground floor was concrete. However, the roof was continuous over the entire building and was surfaced with slate-on-wood sheathing, supported by laminated wood trusses. The roof was sealed under the joists but above the trusses with matched wood. Cell construction in blocks G and H had recently been completed, and these cells were occupied. These cells were built of reinforced concrete columns, floors, and partitions. Sections I and K of the cell block were being constructed in the same manner as sections G and H, and the concrete had already been poured on the 4th range. The wood forms were still left on this range, and the new forms for the 5th range had already been placed with the reinforcing steel in position and ready for pouring the next day. The cells in sections G and H were approximately 8 feet square and were outfitted with 2 folding bunks, mattresses, and blankets only located on these beds. The cells also contained wood chairs and a table, and there were 4 men located in each cell. Of the other buildings involved in the secondary fires, all were of combustible construction. The penitentiary was surrounded on all sides by city water mains of considerable capacity, on the main lines of which were numerous hydrants located along the south and west walls. Static pressure in this vicinity averaged about 85 pounds. Although the supply was severely tested, it held up well. While there were several hundred feet of 2.5-inch cotton rubber-lined hose kept on reels on the site, there was no institutional organization, and almost entire reliance was placed on the city's facilities. There were also numerous small extinguishers distributed throughout the premises. April 21st was Easter Monday, and the prisoners had taken their customary meal at 4:30 p.m., followed by exercise in the prison yard. At 5:30 p.m., when they had been locked in their cells for the night, one convict noticed smoke coming from the scaffolding. The point of origin of the fire was positively determined as near the northwest corner of the new cell blocks known as I and K. The fire started either in the wood roof or wood forms, which were already ready for concrete placing in the 5th range of cells. As panic-stricken prisoners screamed for the guards to let them out of their cells, the fire was already reaching major proportions. Residents of Columbus reportedly heard the prisoners' agonized cries. dozens rushed to the prison walls to see thick black smoke pouring into the sky. Noted one witness, "I was tending my station when the fire broke out. When I saw the flames and heard the cries, I ran to the gate. It seemed like 1,000 men were yelling and beating on the bars. I could hear one voice that was very shrill, screaming, 'For God's sake, let me out. I'm burning. I'm burning.' It was too much for me, and I ran away from the building. When I came back 15 minutes later, most of the cries had stopped." Warden Thomas, a hardliner who had stopped many escape attempts in the past, was afraid that the fire was part of an escape plan and that during the confusion large numbers of convicts would try to escape. Therefore, instead of releasing the trapped prisoners, Thomas went to the prison yard and waited for the arrival of National Guardsmen he had summoned. The convicts, meanwhile, were rattling in their cages and pleading for someone to let them free. Firefighters had responded within minutes of the first alarm, but were not allowed into the prison until the National Guard had arrived. The streets on all four sides of the prison were filled with armed National Guardsmen standing at attention towards the prison walls. Prison guards with machine guns pointed at the windows were ordered to shoot on sight any escaping prisoners. The Columbus City Police were lined up on the pavement. Army troops surrounded the main gate with fixed bayonets. Dazed prisoners, wandering about in the yard, made bitter accusations, saying that many lives could still be saved if the guards would unlock the cells. But the master keykeeper refused to open the cells, citing orders he had been given to keep the cells locked in any emergency. Noted Father O'Brien, if Warden Thomas had stepped inside the walls during the pandemonium, he surely would have been killed. Those men had no thought of escape. They were thinking of those men perishing in the flames like moths. They were enraged because of the utter helplessness, because they were beyond the help of those gathered outside the wall. The first fire apparatus arrived less than 2 minutes after the call was sent in. The first equipment to arrive consisted of 1 truck and 3 engine companies. The first fire company to go into action connected to a hydrant at the northwest corner of the new auditorium and directed a stream from a turret nozzle into the north windows of the I and K cell blocks. However, heavy iron grilling in the window caused the stream to be so broken up as to be rendered ineffective, and this line was eventually cut off. In the meantime, a second pumper had connected to the hydrant directly north of the auditorium, and a stream was directed toward the north end of the building. By this time, the building was burning fiercely, and the entire roof over the I and K blocks had fallen in, fueling the fire further. All the while, firemen and guards were aided by convicts armed with axes and sledgehammers. They proceeded to knock bars and locks from the cell doors and remove the dead and dying from their cells, carrying them down the stairs or lowering them by means of ropes through holes cut in the outer netting to the floor below and to the outside. Following the first alarm at 5:39, the fire department officials, seeing the seriousness of the situation upon their arrival, immediately sent in additional alarms. The second going in at 5:42, the third at 5:48, and a fourth at 6:03. The second and third alarms each calling out 3 engines and 1 truck company, and the four engine and 2 truck companies, or almost all the available equipment in the city, a total of 13 pumps and 5 fire truck companies. There were approximately 140 firemen normally responding on the equipment called into service, although this number was considerably supplemented by responsive members of the off shift, so that the total number of firemen working was actually greater than 140. The third pumper to go into action connected to a hydrant opposite the penitentiary entrance. The lines were carried over the roof and up a ladder to the top of the front dormitory. By this time, the fire had spread rapidly through the roof structure above the G&H cell blocks, eaten its way over the top of the temporary frame partition between the dormitory and the cell block, and was creeping into the concealed roof space over the dormitory. However, the quick and effective action on the part of the department in cutting holes in the roof and directing streams into the concealed space, as well as bringing a hose line in through the barred windows of the south wall on the third range, prevented the fire from spreading into that section. At the height of the fire, there were 8 pumpers, mostly of 1,000-gallon capacity, in actual operation, supplying 23 streams directed on all sides of the burning building. A strong westerly wind opposed the firefighting efforts, which continued for several hours. By about 9 p.m., however, the fire was brought under control. While the main fire was still at its height, many of the convicts assisted in the efforts.